In the heart of the galactic capital, beneath the towering halls of the Dominion Council, a war council convened. The chamber, filled with the oldest and most powerful species in the universe, echoed with heated discussions. At the center of it all was a growing threat, the Zarathian swarm, a species that knew only hunger, devouring entire civilizations, leaving nothing but lifeless husks behind. The Dominion had faced countless wars before, but this was different. The swarm had overrun species that were bred for war. The Korgans, a race of towering brutes with impenetrable hides, had fallen. The VA Theric, creatures engineered for battle with centuries of military tradition, were annihilated. The swarm moved without fear, without mercy. Even the greatest war strategists saw no clear path to victory. A Zelvader admiral, his golden crest gleaming under the council's lights, proposed a desperate measure, drafting auxiliary forces from minor species. His voice was calm, calculated. We must explore every option, even the humans. The room fell silent for a moment. Then laughter. High-ranking officials from every corner of the Dominion erupted in amusement. The suggestion was absurd. Humans were merchants, diplomats, explorers, not warriors. The idea of using them as soldiers was as laughable as sending unarmed civilians into battle. One of the elder counselors, a towering Varkle with razor-lined jaws, scoffed. Humans are tier 7 at best. No natural defenses, no psionic capabilities, no evolutionary advantages. What can they do that we cannot? Another, a Corlith intelligence officer, added, their history is violent, yes, but their wars were primitive, fought with outdated weapons. Against an enemy like the Swarm, they would be nothing more than fodder. The matter seemed settled. Humanity was deemed insignificant, unworthy of discussion in matters of true war. But not everyone in the chamber agreed. Sitting in the shadows, silent and observing, was Commander Valak. Unlike the others, he had studied humans. He had seen something the rest of the galaxy refused to acknowledge. He had read the reports of human endurance, the way they fought even when outnumbered, how they adapted in real time, how they refused to break under pressure. He had seen battle footage from their past wars, how they turned impossible situations into victories through sheer will. And most importantly, he knew that they were the only species that waged war not just for survival, but for the sake of war itself. As the council continued debating strategies, Valak made his decision. He would not wait for permission. In secret, he issued an order. A battalion of human soldiers would be placed on the front lines. Officially, they were there to observe. Unofficially, they were being thrown into battle as an experiment. Meanwhile, on Earth, the call for conscription came unexpectedly. Humans, who had lived under the assumption that they were minor players in galactic affairs, were suddenly being drafted into a war they barely understood. Captain Elias Carter, a seasoned soldier with years of battlefield experience, was among the first to be recruited. He had fought in countless conflicts back home, but he had never imagined fighting for survival of the galaxy itself. He and his battalion were transported to the war front, a distant, desolate planet known as Xiphos 9, a world already ravaged by battle, its skies filled with burning wreckage from previous failed defenses. The humans were given outdated weapons and minimal armor. Their presence was tolerated, not respected. As they prepared for the coming battle, Carter noticed the expressions of the alien officers. Arrogance, pity. They had already written off the humans before they had even set foot on the battlefield. He could see it in their eyes. This was a suicide mission. And yet, something in his gut told him otherwise. Across the trenches, elite warriors from the Dominion forces stood ready. Massive Korgans with plasma cannons, the agile Zelvader wielding energy blades, the telepathic Varkai coordinating formations with psychic precision. These were the best the galaxy had to offer, and even they were terrified. Then, the sirens wailed. The swarm was coming. The ground trembled as the first wave of the enemy force descended from the sky like a storm. Insectoid creatures, thousands upon thousands, their shrieks filling the air as they charged forward in an unrelenting tide. The battle had begun, and humanity's trial by fire was about to commence. The sky turned black as the swarm descended. The first impact sent shockwaves across the battlefield. Kicking up dust and debris, the elite warriors of the Dominion sprang into action, each species relying on their strengths. The Korgans formed an impenetrable shield wall, using their brute force to hold the line. The Zelvader danced through the battlefield with precision, cutting down enemies with energy blades. The Varkai unleashed devastating psionic waves, ripping the swarm apart with sheer mental force. For a moment, it seemed as if the galaxy's finest had the upper hand. But then, the swarm adapted. The second wave came faster, more coordinated. The ground shook as massive biotitans emerged from beneath the surface, spewing acid that melted through the Korgan's armor. The telepathic commands of the Varkai were overwhelmed by the sheer collective will of the hive mind. The Dominion forces faltered. Their formations collapsed. The war machines that had defended the galaxy for centuries were crumbling, and the humans were left behind, stranded on a collapsing front. Captain Elias Carter took in the chaos. The swarm was overwhelming, endless. He looked at his men, soldiers who had never seen war on this scale. Fear gripped them. The alien commanders had already abandoned the battlefield, writing them off as casualties before the fight had even begun. Carter gritted his teeth. If they were going to die, they weren't going to die running. Hold the line. His voice cut through the panic. No retreat, no surrender. We fight. The first clash was brutal. The swarm tore through their ranks, expecting an easy slaughter. But something unexpected happened. The humans fought back. They weren't like the Dominion forces, who relied on brute strength, superior numbers, or psionic abilities. Humans were adaptable. They didn't follow predictable formations. They adjusted with every second. Their weapons were primitive by galactic standards, but their tactics weren't. They moved fast, hitting weak points, targeting joints, exploiting terrain. They fought dirty. One soldier, out of ammo, drove his combat knife into a swarm creature's throat, twisting until it fell. Another set makeshift tripwires using scavenge cables, sending entire squad of enemies crashing into their own forces. They weren't fighting by the galaxy's rules. They were fighting to win. The swarm hesitated. It was a tiny pause, barely a second, but in a battle where every moment determined life or death, it was enough. The swarm had faced warlike species before. They had seen disciplined armies, relentless berserkers, and cold, calculated tacticians. But they had never encountered anything like this. Humans didn't break under pressure. They thrived in it. Carter's battalion pushed forward, using guerrilla tactics that made no sense to the hive mind. They spread out unpredictably, attacking from angles the swarm didn't anticipate. The creatures expected their enemies to fight in formations, to rely on overwhelming power or psionic strategies. Humans did neither. They moved in chaos, deliberate, violent chaos. A wounded soldier, bleeding out, still managed to pull a grenade pin and tackle an enemy, taking it down with him. Another, completely outnumbered, lured the swarm into a narrow ravine, where a hidden detonation buried them alive. The tide was turning. Carter saw an opportunity. The swarm's coordination relied on their command units, larger creatures that controlled the smaller ones through neural links. The Dominion had tried brute force assault against them and failed. But Carter knew a direct attack wouldn't work. He needed something unpredictable. He split his forces into small teams, each striking from a different angle. The swarm couldn't adjust fast enough. Humans weren't just fighters. They were hunters. They stalked the command units, striking at just the right moment. One by one, the neural links were severed. The swarm lost cohesion. The once unified horde turned into scattered groups, confused and vulnerable. Then, something unthinkable happened. The swarm retreated. For the first time in the war, the unstoppable enemy broke. They left behind their dead and withdrew, reforming at a distance. It wasn't a loss, not yet, but it was no longer the effortless slaughter they had expected. The battlefield was silent, except for the heavy breathing of the surviving soldiers. Carter looked around, covered in blood, hands trembling from adrenaline. They had survived. Not just survived, they had won. And the galaxy hadn't noticed. News of the battle spread faster than any official report. The Dominion, once dismissive of humanity's role in the war, now had to face an undeniable truth. Humans had done the impossible. They had fought where superior species had fallen. They had turned the tide against an enemy that had never known defeat. In the high chambers of the Dominion Council, there was no laughter now. There was only silence and unease. The highest-ranking generals, strategists, and rulers of the galaxy reviewed the footage with grim expressions. The way the humans fought defied logic. They had no natural advantages, no superior weapons, no psionic mastery, and yet they had forced the swarm into retreat. Commander Valak, who had secretly placed humans on the front lines, now stood before the council as they debated what to do next. The elder races were torn. Some wanted to integrate humanity into their military structure to harness their potential as strategic assets. Others were more cautious. "They are dangerous," a Zelvader admiral muttered. "They fight like they were born for it. If they can turn the tide against the swarm, what happens if they turn against us?" But war had no room for hesitation. The swarm had been wounded, but they were not defeated. Their hive mind was relentless. They would not make the same mistake twice. Even now, their forces were massing for another attack, stronger, larger, more brutal than before. The Dominion had no choice. They needed the humans. Carter and his soldiers, once ignored, were now at the center of military operations. They weren't just reinforcements. They were instructors. Battle-hardened warriors from a primitive world now stood before the elite warriors of the galaxy, teaching them how to fight in ways they had never considered. The lessons were brutal. A Korgan general, 3 times the size of a human, scoffed as Carter demonstrated urban warfare techniques. "This is beneath us. We are warriors. We fight with honor." Carter's response was swift. "Honor doesn't matter when you're dead." The training pushed the Dominion forces beyond their limits. Precision formations were broken down in favor of fluid, adaptive tactics. Soldiers were forced into unpredictable combat scenarios, trained to think and act without relying on orders from above. The galaxy's finest warriors had spent millennia mastering tradition. Now, they had to unlearn it, and it worked. When the swarm returned, they expected the same patterns. They expected walls of muscle and steel, psychic attacks, and calculated formations. Instead, they found chaos. The battle raged across multiple worlds, but something had changed. The Dominion forces no longer fought with rigid discipline. They fought like humans. They set traps. They used terrain. They turned the enemy's own tactics against them. They fought as if survival depended on it, because now they understood that it did. But even as the war turned in their favor, whispers spread to the Dominion. Fear, not of the swarm, but of the humans. They had gone from overlooked to indispensable in the span of a single campaign. Their way of war was infecting every battle strategy, every military doctrine. The galaxy had spent eons shaping the perfect warriors, refining combat into an art. But humans had turned war into something else, something far more terrifying. A necessity, a talent, a purpose. And the Dominion was starting to wonder if they had just created a problem far greater than the swarm. The war was ending, not in years, not in decades, but in months. What was once an unwinnable conflict had turned into a systematic eradication of the swarm. Humanity's influence had reshaped the battlefield. The Dominion had evolved, not by choice, but by necessity. They had abandoned outdated doctrines and embraced brutal efficiency. The swarm, once unstoppable, was now on the defensive. Their neural coordination, their overwhelming numbers, none of it mattered anymore. Every time they adapted, humans countered. Every time they shifted tactics, humans found an opening. It wasn't just strategy. It was instinct. Victory was inevitable. But the galaxy's leaders were no longer celebrating. Deep within the Dominion's core world, the highest-ranking officials gathered once more. The swarm was collapsing, their last hive worlds under siege. The threat that had nearly ended civilization was all but extinct. But the conversation was no longer about the swarm. It was about what came next. A Zelvader counselor, once an opponent of humanity's involvement, now spoke with visible tension. "We used them to win this war, But what happens when there's no war left? A Corlid general, known for his cold logic, responded without hesitation. We cannot allow them to remain unchecked. They are unnatural. War is not a part of life. It is a burden, a horror. But to them, he shook his head. It is something else entirely. The footage was undeniable. Humans fought differently from any other species in the Dominion. They took losses that should have broken them. They survived where no one else could. And when the swarm was finally wiped from existence, the unspoken truth became clear. Humans had become something more than warriors. They had become war itself. There were suggestions. Some spoke of containment, others of isolation. A few even whispered the possibility of preemptive action before humanity could realize what they had become. But they were too late. Humanity had learned from the Dominion, but the Dominion had learned far more from humanity. The influence of Earth was no longer limited to a single battalion or a single war. Entire fleets had adopted human tactics. Planets had rewritten their military doctrines in Earth's image. The Dominion soldiers no longer fought as they once had. They fought like humans, and there was no turning back. When the final swarm stronghold fell, and the last enemy was burned from existence, the galaxy did not feel peace. It felt fear, because the greatest threat to the Dominion was no longer the swarm. It was the warriors they had unleashed, the ones they could never control. The humans,